Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches The Great Gatsby. In this video, we're going to be doing an analysis of chapter 7, but the second half of it. So if you haven't seen my earlier video on part 1, please pause me, go back and find that in the playlist. Likewise, if you haven't read the full chapter, make sure you've done so because there are really big spoilers in this chapter analysis. There are videos to help you with that, so do have a little look at the audiobook if you need. If you're coming back to this after a while, this video doesn't have a plot summary, but there is one in that chapter 7 part 1 analysis. So again, if you just need a refresh, go back before you have a watch of this. But for now, let's just get started. So the first thing to pay attention to here is the quite remarkable shift in narrative style. Obviously, the last that we read was this terrifying moment of foreshadowing where Nick tells us that they drove on towards death through the cooling twilight. And the very next paragraph begins dramatically differently. The young Greek, Michaelis, who ran the coffee joint beside the ash heaps, was the principal witness at the inquest. And there is our clue that that previous line was not a metaphorical death, because now we're shifting to a future time where we're recalling the details that were given at the inquest, which is, of course, where there is a sort of inquiry into the manner of the death and how the death occurred. Note in this section, we get a lot of indirect or reported speech because we're obviously getting the echoes, the memories of what was said in this timeline. And we're moving towards a narrative that is describing the events of the day for George and Myrtle Wilson. We get some focus again on George Wilson's physical appearance. Sick in his office, really sick, pale as his own pale hair and shaking all over. And we are reminded of a kind of, or told about an argument that occurs. And as we get more into this argument, that's where we start to get into the direct speech. So we can imagine that Michaelis is as best as he can explain it, everything that he said, but Nick is giving it to us in the benefit of direct speech. But have a little look at this description of Myrtle and George's argument. So this is obviously about George discovering that Myrtle is having an affair. And this sort of change that Michaelis sort of sees as he's used to George being really indecisive and sort of not being his own man, and Myrtle being in charge. And so the fact that Wilson's got Myrtle locked up, this kind of idea of trying to control now in this situation, something that has been out of control, so slightly reminiscent of Tom Buchanan here, but the difference is that George is made ill with it, like the grief of it has made him feel ill. What is particularly interesting, however, is Myrtle's response to George. Michaelis remembers that a little after 7, he heard Mrs. Wilson's voice loud and scolding. "Beat me," he heard her cry. "Throw me down and beat me, you dirty little coward." So this is really kind of telling and devastatingly sad moment, a reflection of their relationship, that Myrtle in this moment scolds Wilson because in her eyes, his lack of physical violence towards her is a sign of his kind of cowardice or weakness. Got to be reminded that her relationship with Tom Buchanan began in a way that sort of felt like it bordered on violence, and then we obviously saw the terrifyingly horrible scene of violence in chapter 2 where he breaks her nose. And in this moment, that kind of violence to Myrtle is a sort of sign of passion and something that she sort of feels that Wilson doesn't have. Obviously, this is building to Myrtle's death. This is what the inquest is. This is what the timeline is bringing us to. And I think it is interesting the way here, the way that Myrtle is described. So you've kind of got this sort of sense of panic. Straight after this argument with Wilson, she rushes out into the dusk, waving her hands and shouting. So there's a sort of sense of desperation here for Myrtle. And then we get a shift again. The death car, as the newspapers called it, didn't stop. So notice the way that you've got this reference to the newspapers sort of sensationalizing the situation, referring to the car as the death car because it's mysterious and no one knows who was driving it. But it wavers tragically for a moment. Tragically for a moment. So there's a little metaphor here again. It's a reminder of what could have been. So there's this idea that there is a little attempt to correct, but the tragedy is that, of course, it doesn't, and then disappears around the next bend. Interesting, of course, that Michaelis at first thinks the colour was light green. We know that the colour green is hugely symbolic in this novel. It's a reminder of hope or money. And here there's a kind of bitterness in the way that this light green colour, I know the car isn't actually light green, but in this moment we're reminded there again, it's another way that this dream is just ending. And yeah, the driver hurries back to where Myrtle Wilson, her life violently extinguished, knelt in the road and mingled her thick dark blood with the dust. There's something so devastating in this line, aside from the fact that her life has been extinguished, so it's like put out, suddenly gone, and Myrtle being someone who is known for kind of this vibrancy in life, but the fact that her thick dark blood is mingling in with the dust, it's a reminder that she never got out of the Valley of Ashes. Yeah, that was the whole thing about Myrtle, wasn't it? She was setting herself away from that, whereas everyone was grey and pale. She was full of colour, she was full of life. She had her way out, which was Tom Buchanan, but in the end all she is blood mingled with that dust. She never escapes from the ash. Now look at this description. Michaelis and this man reached her first, but when they had torn open her shirtwaist, still damp with perspiration, they saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and there was no need to listen for the heart beneath. The mouth was wide open and ripped a little at the corners, as though she had choked a little in giving up the tremendous vitality she had stored so long. Aside from the fact that it's quite a gruesome image of her death, particularly this idea of the breast being like a flap, the fact that there is a focus on her breasts and her mouth, this idea of tearing the shirtwaist, she is still sexualized, even in death. And if you look structurally at the cycle of Myrtle, so how she's introduced, look at the way she's introduced, carrying her flesh sensuously, perceptible vitality, her nerves were continually smouldering, she licks her lips. So the first time we meet her, she's sexualized through the view of Nick, and then in death, she's sexualized. Even though it's gruesome, even though it's graphic, she still is. And this is so horribly symbolic. It's this cycle of Myrtle. That's all she ever did. That's all she ever was an image, an idea, a sexualized idea for men to use and enjoy, i.e. Tom Buchanan, in life, and now even here, quite horribly, in death. So this section here is taken from the moment where they've arrived at the garage and Tom is inside and they've realised what's going on. But what I think is particularly interesting about this moment is, again, the way that Myrtle is described in death. Now, we don't have the sexualization anymore, but we are returning to another metaphor. Fitzgerald writes, through Nick's eyes, that Myrtle Wilson's body wrapped in a blanket and then in another blanket, as though she suffered from a chill in the hot night, lay on a work table by the wall, and then Tom is bending over it motionless. Now this is important because obviously there is this ongoing extended metaphor of cars representing relationships, and the kind of recklessness of driving can be the recklessness of relationships. But on top of that, we've had the fact that Tom and Myrtle's relationship has almost been disguised by this story of the car. And earlier on in the chapter, when Tom agrees with Wilson that he will send him over that car, that he will give him the car that they've been talking about selling, it represents Tom kind of giving Myrtle back to him, like that Myrtle is the car And by saying, oh, I'll sell you that car after all, he's saying, all right, you can have your wife back. It's like a contract passed. So it's particularly fitting that in this moment in her death, she is wrapped up and placed on the work table. So it's the sort of the finishing of this kind of idea of her being this car, this negotiation between Tom and Wilson, although of course Wilson was unaware what he was negotiating with. I think it's also important, just looking at this scene, to see again the incredible grief of Wilson, the raw emotion of Wilson in this moment. We also see some raw emotion from Tom, a character that we can obviously dislike so intensely in so many different ways. But this is one of the things that Fitzgerald is good at. Yes, he creates characters that are wildly dislikable, but he then allows his readers to empathise with them in these little moments. And here is one of these moments where Nick hears a low, husky sob and saw that the tears were overflowing from his face. The goddamn coward, he whimpered. He didn't even stop his car. So two things there. Yes, some empathy for him. So this is real emotion. But here we also have plot catalyst, because we have Tom's anger at Gatsby because he believes that it is, of course, that Gatsby that has mowed down Myrtle. In this moment. So obviously that is going to be a plot catalyst to bring about later aspects. This chapter is about death in so many ways, or endings in so many ways. So we've had the ending, the death of Myrtle. We've also had the death of the dream, i.e. the ending of the relationship of Daisy and Gatsby, and therefore Gatsby's subsequent dreams being killed off. But they're not the only ones, because this is also the death of the relationship of Nick and Jordan, a relationship that has been founded on perhaps some quite superficial qualities, and that is really reflected in this exchange. Just think of it in the context of what's just happened. Jordan, who is Nick's girlfriend, has just witnessed someone dying. Yeah, she's probably looking for a little bit of comfort. She's probably just looking for someone to give her a cuddle. It's quite traumatic what they've all been through. And you can see this when she says, "Won't you come in, Nick?" And then it's only 9:30. So it's like she can't quite ask him directly, "I need you to be here with me." But she's hinting. Look at how he responds. "I'd be damned if I'd go in. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan too." She must have seen something of this in my expression, for she turned abruptly away and ran up the porch steps into the house. Jordan has done nothing to incite this reaction other than she's just tainted by the fact that she's friends with Daisy and Tom and Nick. But in this moment, he shows her that he's sort of repulsed by her and everyone else. It shows all over his face. And so that is why she abruptly runs off. Now, that's not the full end of their relationship, but again, it's a moment where Nick is unaware of his own relationship, or of the idea of Jordan being a real person with feelings. All the way through, he's talked about one of the reasons that he's attracted to her being that she's scornful and cynical and one-dimensional and wouldn't have feelings. And here again, because that's his assumption, she's cold, yeah, she's scornful, she doesn't care. He's not reading that actually she might need a little bit of comfort in this moment as well. And speaking of dead relationships, here we have again this moment with Gatsby and Daisy. Now, Gatsby hasn't come off great in this chapter. None of them really have. And obviously, up until this moment, we are to believe that Gatsby was the one that killed Myrtle. And it's in this moment that obviously we discover that it's not the case, that Daisy killed Myrtle. And Gatsby, because of his love for her, is willing to cover that up and take the blame. He explains here to Nick. But look at the kind of focus that he has. So you can say, "Oh, that's good, that's nice, you know, he's that makes him a good person because he's willing to take the blame for Daisy." But he barely seems to be thinking about Myrtle and what it means. "She'll be all right tomorrow," he said presently. I'm just going to wait here. So his focus is all on Daisy, 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 and how she is responding. And again, we've got this idea of his delusion. Even after what's happened over this lunch, he still thinks, or he's still trying to think, that there is hope for them. He says, I'm going to wait here and see if he tries to bother her about that unpleasantness this afternoon. She's locked herself into her room, and if he tries any brutality, she's going to turn the light out and on again. Now think about that symbolically. Think about the way that light has been used by Fitzgerald through this novel. It begins, doesn't it, right at the very, very start, chapter 1, with this image of Gatsby looking out at a green light, stretching his hand out. And here we are at the end-ish of the novel with him looking for a light which is so often considered to be a symbol of hope. And he is expecting Daisy to turn the light on. So symbolically, it's like he's looking for a sign from her that they are okay and that they can be together. Note the way that he downplays, he uses euphemism in describing the unpleasantness this afternoon. He can't quite come to understand what's actually happened, and when he's talking about if he tries to bother about that unpleasantness this afternoon, he's not talking about Myrtle being dead. He's talking about the fact that they told Tom that they were in a relationship. That's what the unpleasantness is. So Gatsby's mind continues to be on Daisy, and with very little reason, because when Nick goes round to investigate where they are, because he thinks, oh, maybe, maybe he's right. Like, perhaps I should go and check. What if he knows? What if something horrible is happening? But look at this image of normality that is created. They're sat across the kitchen table. They've got cold fried chicken between them and a couple of bottles of ale. They're holding hands and their heads are close together. It's such a picture of a kind of domestic normality. It's a reminder of them as a unit. This is them as a unit coming together. Gatsby's all the way over there. He's irrelevant. Now, what's quite interesting is this moment. It talks about the unmistakable air of natural intimacy. Yeah, that domestic normality. But anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. And here is a big question mark about this. Does Tom know that Daisy killed Myrtle? We don't know the answer, but this word here, conspiring, carries interesting connotations because it makes you think of secrecy, it makes you think of crime, it makes you think of covering things up. Now, all of that might just be covering up the scandal of the fact that she's been having an affair with another man and kind of plotting how they're going to move forward. It might mean that. It could means something else. It's going to be left ambiguously for you. You're going to have to sort of make your decision about that. But the fact is that whilst they're having this intimate moment, in whatever way they're doing it, planning their future together over the kind of domestic normality of chicken and ale, Gatsby is standing vigil, wanting to be alone, willing to stay there until the very, very end, as though Nick's presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. And that is the bleak reality. This chapter has ended hope and that kind of sense of the life in their relationship. He no longer has anything. They are simply watching over nothing, which is so sad. But again, like I said earlier on in the chapter, Fitzgerald is absolutely brilliant because what he does is he creates these characters that are so flawed and so unlikable in so many ways, and then somehow still manages to make you feel such great empathy in these moments. And that's one of them. Gatsby's dream is dead. Daisy and Gatsby are no more, and that kind of vision of a future based on their past has, quite ironically, been obliterated. Ironic because that is exactly what he wanted her to do with Tom. He wanted to obliterate their history, their life together, so that it could be recreated with him. And that is not going to happen. I do feel that with every analysis of Gatsby it just gets more and more depressing. So I'm sorry about that. At some point I will do a video that has happy themes, but probably not of Gatsby. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Got any questions? Pop them in the comments. I will get back to you. If you haven't subscribed, oh, please do so. And then you'll know when I have more videos coming your way. That's it. Thank you so much. Happy revising.